Yo, 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 Smokey the Bear here, telling you only you can prevent a push failure. Alright, here we go. We're talking about World War One, looking at the causes of the United States entry into World War One. So 1914, war starts, no U.S. You should already know from what we learned of why the United States wanted to stay neutral, going all the way back to Washington with his Declaration of Neutrality, farewell address. Okay, so let's look at the causes here. Why the United States actually enters into World War One. First one we're going to look at is this document here. Notice to all travelers. Okay, now this is not the coronavirus to say you have to stay home. This is a notice from the British, sorry, not the British government. It's the government of Germany. Germany is telling you that it's dangerous to travel in the waters around the British Isles. And here is what they're talking about. So any boats, any ships, any people, swimmers, mostly boats though, looking to take cargo from one place to another surrounding this area would be subject to be blown up. And the reasons why the Germans were so good at patrolling this was because, U-boats. Yeah, those underwater boats called, we call them submarines, but they called them U-boats. So this is what happened. One of these big ships known as the Lusitania, which was a British boat, not a U.S. boat, but there were a bunch of Americans on the boat. It got blown up, and when it went down, it caused some worldwide panic, and it looked like a passenger boat, but besides the passengers being on the boat, it also was taking cargo to the British. So the German U-boat sunk the sucker, and it was considered one of these causes of U.S. entry. But it wasn't a U.S. boat. Let's make sure we know that for the quiz. It's a British boat. Lusitania got sunk. There's another picture of the Lusitania going down. It gives you a little tiny map inside the big map of what one of these U-boats did in between here of the British Islands, or the British Isles. And of course there's a meme about it. This is the Titanic before it sank, not the actual Lusitania, so sorry if it was too soon for some of you. Okay, so at home, then you have still a bunch of people that don't want this war to happen, but you get the beginnings of some of these groups that say, well, it needs to happen. Okay, so a small vocal minority, influential Republicans, mostly from the East, because the East, would be most affected by this shipping. Okay, so and be the closest geographically to a war that would happen. But most people didn't want this war to happen in, like, the United States be involved in it in any way. Okay, the economy's good. The war's happening somewhere else. The United States is benefiting from it. Not the first time that's happened, but that's what's happening here again. The other problem is there is not enough production, not enough ships. There's no military preparedness for this war. The United States would not be ready for entry into the war at this time. So here's some things that are going on. Wilson says, still got to stay neutral. We know that the Belgium's been run over by the Germans, and we know that we have more cultural similarities to the British than we do any of these German countries, as Germany is breaking off from all these German states and becoming more unified. That there's a bunch of reasons why the United States should not enter the war, is what Wilson is explaining. This won't last. This is just going to be temporary here. So, in the meantime, the United States will prepare for war. These are the things that it does. These are the things you should know. The National Defense Act of 1916, signed by Congress and President Wilson, doubles the size of the Army, Navy, military presence. Okay. What it also then extends is more money for more ships, okay, and increasing the size of the Navy. You have a high sense of anti-war feelings in the South and the Midwest, and especially with women across the country. So the South and the Midwest are mostly farmers, okay, so this would be a disruption to them, and they don't necessarily see it as something that would benefit them, so don't want it. Doesn't hurt them, doesn't benefit them, stay out of it. Women, they don't see the advantages of going to war because they are still worried about their own plight within the United States, and they want suffrage, they want to be recognized, equal, all that stuff that this would then postpone for them. At least that's their early feelings. They will change their minds. Film, print, and music all helped lead these anti-war messages. Keep at peace, stay out of the war. Then you have the election of 1916. This is the guy that's going to run against Wilson on the Republican side. He loses, but it's a very close election, and he'll become extremely important moving forward as Secretary of State and then a part of the Supreme Court as Chief Justice. Charles Evans Hughes. We'll talk more about him later when he is that Supreme Court Chief Justice. But it would seem that the country might like the idea of Hughes because of their affinity for previous Republican progressive presidents in Roosevelt and Taft. So it's extremely close. Here's the results. Well, not yet. Hang on to those results. Wilson believes that he's the one that is the candidate of peace, and he can keep the United States at peace because throughout his presidency from the first part from 1912 to 1916, the United States stayed out of the war. Okay? Also considered a progressive president, so looking for these things that would attract voters. You can read them there if you want. But he's kept neutrality and kept free trade. That's what he runs on, and that's what he wins with. This is an advertisement for Wilson on one of these trucks. You can see on the side there the billboard. There's the election results. So very close electoral vote, 52% to 48% in the favor of Wilson, and then also in the popular vote, 49% to 46%. I may have messed that up. Electoral vote first, then popular vote. You can read it. The big state here that would have thrown it the other direction would have been California. So California lost by, well, Hughes lost California by 3,800 votes. And he failed to attend a meeting with the governor of California, Hiram Johnson, which may have led towards the non-endorsement of Johnson towards Hughes, which could possibly be why Wilson won California. That little tiny minor 5%, again, that's the socialist movement in the United States during this time. Okay, here's your cause. We got a cause. We got one so far, which is Lusitania. Now we've got a second one, which is the Zimmerman telegram. All these numbers here get decoded. This is a message from the German government to the Mexican government. And eventually, this is what it is. Still hard to see, but you can pause it and read it if you want. What it is a proposal for Mexico to join Germany in World War I and lead a fight against the United States to recover some of its lost land. Here's a political cartoon about this. You can see the lost land of the Mexican-American War and the representation of Germany there with the money, asking Mexico to join them. Same here. Germany whispering into Mexico, join us and get some of that United States back. So here's what it leads to. It leads to German unlimited submarine warfare. Before this, restricted submarine warfare. Now, Germans say, anybody not with us, getting blowed up. What the telegram suggests is that Mexico invades the United States to recover its land. Think about that for a second. If the United States is occupied fighting Mexico in the south, then the United States won't be involved in World War I in Europe. That would allow then Germany to have the United States out of the fight, believing that they could defeat the British on their own. The effects of this ends anti-war feelings in the South. The people in the South are like, we don't want the fight here, so let's go to war there. Eventually, it leads towards the president authorizing the arming of merchant ships. That's business ships. This is cargo ships. To be able to arm themselves and shoot down submarines, the German U-boats, if possible. Imagine that for a second. You're a cargo ship. Now you're supposed to be able to be a military cargo ship at the same time. That didn't go over well. It didn't work. Eventually, they introduced this method to try to stop the destruction of the cargo ships by the German submarines or U-boats. This didn't work either. You can see there at the bottom, 7 U.S. ships sunk by U-boats. But it was the military, the Navy, alongside of U.S. merchant ships to try to protect them to be able to continue to do trade. But that didn't work out so well. Eventually, Wilson will speak to Congress. Okay, so these will all be series of things that will happen that will lead towards the end of neutrality and the entrance of the United States into World War I. When Wilson speaks to Congress, you will see some similarities between other presidents that had gone before Congress and asked for a declaration of war. So I'm not going to play Wilson's speech for you, but if you want to, you can look it up, check it out. But from it, he says no longer is neutrality possible. And it leads towards a declaration of war, 82-6 in the Senate and 373-50 in the House of Representatives. Therefore, you get a declaration of war against Germany. Pause here for a second. Remind yourself, and if you want to share this with your little brother or sister or your parents, talk amongst yourselves as your neighbors. Maybe you go over to your neighbor and knock on the door and ask, hey, why did the United States enter into World War I? See if they know anything, and see if you can teach them, or maybe just teach yourself. All right, go for it. Put a summary in your notes. Maybe hit pause, because I'm going to keep going. All right, next is American mobilization. Now that they've entered the war, remember those things that they did in 1916 with Congress's approval to increase the size of the military. You have a complete diving in of the United States into the waters of war. Within that, there is a Committee on Public Information, or the CPI, that is created by the federal government and led by George Creel. Here's what it does. Sets up this government agency to support the war in any way possible. Printing out stuff through music and film, trying to shape public opinion, moving away from anti-war to pro-war. The war is going to be good. These are the things that it's going to do. If you don't do it, like, this is the bad stuff that's going to happen. That's the simple version of things. But they're going to make an enemy. Germany becomes the enemy, and everything that is Germany then becomes evil, essentially, a negative campaign upon all things that are German. Let's pause for a second and look at the recent U.S. history and realize that, not today recent history, but from what we've been studying, in the 1800s you had a large group of German immigrants coming into the United States, and now you have a negative campaign against Germany. So if you look at that neutrality, right, a lot of people come from different places around Europe that are involved in World War I, but now are living in the United States. Their families might still be there in Europe fighting in World War I. So it's a very sensitive subject to a lot of Americans, those that might have some sort of German connections or German ancestry. But here's what happens. They ban German books. Tell everybody in the United States that now you're living in the United States and you need to abandon old world ties. Those that you left for a reason, and you're in the United States for a reason. Therefore, Germany bad, U.S. good. Unhyphenate yourself. You're no longer German American. You're just American. There begins a harassment of peace activists promoting heroes of the war. So you try to silence those against the war and enlarge the movement of the masses towards an acceptance, or even beyond acceptance, into a fervor for heroes and victory. This becomes the famous image of World War One, and it looks like the kids and the family have returned. So um, hang on here, and we'll pick it up once we can quiet the children. Okay, goodbye. What?